Record-breaking climber Jake Wisnet dies at 30 after tragic Sierra Nevada accident. Record-setting American climber Jake Whisenant, who became known for his extraordinary speed ascents of Yosemite's iconic El Capitan, has died at the age of 30 following an accident in California's Sierra Nevada. Now let's take a deeper look and uncover every layer of this story on our AI podcast.
Imagine standing at the base of a 3,000-foot cliff. Just a sheer granite wall.
Yeah, I mean, for most people, just craning your neck to look at the top of something like that induces a massive wave of vertigo.
Right. And climbing it usually takes days of grueling survival. You know, you're hauling heavy gear, fighting exhaustion, sleeping on the wall. But for 30-year-old American climber Jake Whisenant, climbing it took less than 3 hours.
Which is wild to even think about.
It really is. I mean, he was a man who lived life at this maximum record-breaking velocity. But the real twist here, the man who made global headlines for this mind-bending speed, he actually spent his final week seeking out the slowest, quietest, most unrecorded isolation on Earth.
Yeah, it's an incredible contrast.
So welcome to today's deep dive, where we are unpacking the legacy of an extraordinary human being. Tragically, Jake died in an accidental incident in the Sierra Nevada on August 3rd. And we're looking at a stack of sources today: news reports, official statements, and this massive outpouring of tributes from the global climbing community.
Right, and the mission here is really to understand the psychology of an elite athlete who lived in these staggering extremes.
Exactly.
It's this profound exploration of human drive. We are looking at a really fascinating dichotomy. You have a climber who mastered the highly publicized, hyper-fast world of Yosemite speed climbing, but who, like you said, simultaneously craved the raw, slow solitude of the remote wilderness.
Two completely different environments.
Completely different, and they demand completely different physical and mental frameworks, you know.
To me, it is like an Olympic sprinter who spends their weekends doing deep-sea meditation or something. Those two mindsets seem entirely contradictory.
Oh, for sure.
Because one is about the frantic optimization of every single millisecond, right? And the other is about timeless stillness. So what is it about the psychology of elite extreme athletes that requires them to swing so wildly between speed and stillness?
Well, to understand that swing, we first have to really unpack the mechanics of the speed itself.
Okay, let's do it.
In Whisenant's case, that need for speed was most publicly realized on one of the most intimidating geological structures on the planet, which is Yosemite's El Capitan.
Right. A massive, completely exposed 3,000-foot vertical wall. And in October 2024, this became the site of the feat that really catapulted Whisenant to wider prominence.
Yeah, he and his climbing partner, Brand Heisel, targeted this specific route known as Lurking Fear.
Which sounds terrifying just by the name.
It is. Lurking Fear is notorious. It's a route on the right side of El Capitan that involves really tricky aid climbing, slanting cracks, immense exposure.
So not a beginner route.
Oh, definitely not. For most highly competent climbers, it's a multi-day expedition. You're bringing a haul bag full of supplies, you're sleeping on portable ledges, hanging hundreds of feet off the wall.
They didn't do that. They completed this 3,000-foot ascent in an unbelievable 2 hours, 55 minutes, and 32 seconds.
Which is just, it's staggering.
Just to give you listening some context on how major this is, they broke the previous record held by absolute legends in the sport, Yuji Hirayama and Nick Fowler.
Right.
And they didn't just edge it out by a few seconds, you know? They beat it by almost 10 full minutes.
And in the world of speed climbing, records are normally shaved down by seconds, like single digits. So a 10-minute margin is a total paradigm shift.
It's unheard of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It forces the entire climbing community to redefine what is literally physically possible on that route.
So how does a human body even move that fast up a vertical wall? I mean, climbing 3,000 feet in under 3 hours is like sprinting up the stairs of the Empire State Building more than twice.
Right.
But you're doing it on sheer rock with no stairs, just tiny millimeter-wide crimps in the granite.
Well, it comes down to a technique called simul-climbing, combined with an absolute flawless mastery of the route.
Okay, simul-climbing. Break that down for us.
So in traditional climbing, one person climbs while the other stays anchored to the wall and feeds them rope, right?
Right.
And they catch them if they fall, right? Then the second person climbs while the first person anchors. It's slow, it's methodical.
One moves, one stops.
Exactly. But in simul-climbing, both athletes are moving at the exact same time, separated by a length of rope.
Wait, really? Both at the same time?
Yeah. There are a few pieces of protective gear placed in the rock between them, but essentially, if one falls, they could easily pull the other completely off the wall.
Oh, wow. So it's basically a 3-hour high-speed choreographed dance where missing a single step means a fatal fall.
That is the perfect analogy. And they aren't figuring out the climb on the fly. They have rehearsed this route so many times that they know every single handhold and foothold by heart.
It's all memorized.
Yeah, they're executing thousands of precise micro-movements from pure muscle memory.
Which I think makes Wisnant's own recap of the climb so wild to read. You would think he would describe it as this grueling, agonizing push to the brink of death.
You'd think so, yeah.
But instead, he reported entering a flow state. He said they remained fully committed to the plan, had an incredible time, and it actually joked about the conditions. He noted they had perfect weather for a, quote, shirtless ascent, and had the whole route to themselves.
Yeah, and we really need to look closely at that mention of the flow state. Because in neuroscience, entering a flow state during extreme sports involves a phenomenon called transient hypofrontality.
Transient hypofrontality. Okay, you're going to have to break that down for us.
Sure, so transient just means temporary. Hypo means less, and frontality refers to the prefrontal cortex of the brain.
Okay.
So when an athlete of this caliber begins executing highly complex, high-stakes movements, the brain temporarily downregulates the prefrontal cortex. That's the area responsible for self-reflection, overthinking, and most importantly, fear.
Wait, so his brain is literally turning off the mechanism that tells him, hey, you are 2,000 feet in the air and one slip means death.
Yes, literally. Because processing fear takes up too much cognitive bandwidth.
What?
Instead, the basal ganglia, that's the part of the brain that stores ingrained motor skills, takes completely over. Hesitation is eliminated. Every handhold becomes entirely intuitive.
So the brain basically stops translating the sheer drop below them as a threat and just processes it as raw data.
Exactly.
I still have to push back a bit on his casual recap of the climb, though. Like, is joking about a shirtless ascent while doing something so dangerous a psychological coping mechanism?
Like a deflection?
Yeah. Is he deflecting from the extreme danger to keep that fear at bay?
I'd argue it's not a coping mechanism at all. It is a genuine reflection of supreme comfort.
Really?
Yeah, because when your technical ability is that high and your flow state is that deep, the mountain ceases to be an adversary you are fighting. It actually becomes a playground.
A playground?
Yeah. The joke isn't a deflection. They weren't just surviving the wall, they were genuinely playing on it. They stripped away all the anxiety that would paralyze a normal person, leaving only the pure, joyous mechanics of upward movement.
They were playing on a 3,000-foot vertical drop. That is just, it's hard to wrap my head around. And that is the hyper-fast, heavily scrutinized world of Yosemite speed climbing.
Right.
But as you mentioned at the start of the deep dive, that is only half of this man's story. The public, record-breaking mastery was followed by a sudden shift.
Yes, a massive shift into the quiet, rugged isolation of his solo expeditions.
Yeah.
On July 15th, so just weeks before his tragic passing, Whisenant took a solo trip to the Kingsburn Divide.
And for those listening who aren't familiar with the geography, the Kingsburn Divide is a roughly 6-mile-long ridge in California's High Sierra.
Yeah, and we're not talking about a well-marked hiking trail here.
Definitely not. This is remote, unforgiving wilderness. He spent 4 days out there completely alone.
The sources describe it as raw, rugged, and classic High Sierra terrain. The geology there is brutal.
Yeah, lots of loose rock.
Exactly. It's characterized by these razor-sharp granite ridges, massive fields of loose rock called talus, and altitudes where the oxygen is noticeably thinner.
And he was just out there sleeping on the dirt beside a rock under the night sky, documenting these spectacular mountain sunrises completely divorced from any audience.
Right. No cameras, no sponsors watching.
And the physical stats of this solo trip are mind-blowing, but in a totally different way than the speed record.
Oh, for sure.
Over those 4 days alone, he climbed 8 different peaks, all of them higher than 13,500 feet.
Yeah.
He was utilizing new scrambles he hadn't done before, and he skied a line from every single summit. 8 peaks over 13,500 feet in 4 days. Alone.
We really need to unpack what scrambling actually means at 13,500 feet.
Yeah, what does that look like?
So scrambling is sort of the gray area between hiking and roped rock climbing. You are using your hands and feet to ascend steep rock, but you aren't using ropes or protective gear.
So free soloing, basically.
In a way, yeah. If you fall on a Class 4 or Class 5 scramble in the High Sierra, it is often fatal. And doing this on routes he had never done before requires a massive psychological shift from his El Capitan mindset.
How so? Because he's still climbing, right?
He is, but on El Capitan, every single movement was rehearsed and memorized. It was a known canvas.
Oh, right.
But in the High Sierra, he is route finding on the fly. He's testing the stability of loose rocks in real time. This is about real-time problem solving and relying entirely on your own instincts without the safety net of a familiar, well-chalked route.
That is terrifying.
And furthermore, skiing a line from those summits in mid-July means he was hunting for these narrow, steep couloirs of remnant snow hidden between the rocks. The physical toll of doing all of this at high altitude while carrying your own gear and skis is immense.
I can't even imagine. But the emotional core of this trip really shines through in his own reflections from the source material.
It really does.
He noted that his confidence grew with every new ridge he scrambled, every basin he crossed, and every ski line he descended. He called the experience genuinely life-enhancing.
Yeah.
But what struck me most was his reaction to leaving. Because he didn't feel relief to be heading back to a warm bed and civilization.
Right, which most of us would.
Exactly. But he felt genuine sadness when hiking out. He wished he had more time to just exist in what he called that simple mountain lifestyle.
That sadness, I think, suggests the wilderness wasn't just a training ground for him. It was where he felt most aligned with himself.
Yeah.
The sheer difficulty of moving through that rugged terrain provided a mental clarity that modern life simply cannot offer.
It's such a striking contrast. It's like an F1 driver, someone whose entire life is built around moving as fast as humanly possible on a heavily engineered track, choosing to spend their off-season trekking across a barren desert on foot, just to see if they can.
That's a great way to put it.
Because we usually associate extreme ambition with an audience. So what does it tell us about human fulfillment? That a guy who holds an international speed record finds his ultimate confidence and joy sleeping in the dirt, miles away from a camera.
Well, I think it reveals that for these elite athletes, true fulfillment isn't actually about external validation at all.
Interesting.
The speed record is just a proof of concept. It proves to the world you have mastered the physical realm. But the solitude, that is where the soul is fed.
Oh.
The dirt, the stars, the unrecorded struggle, that is where a person proves themselves to themselves. When you remove the stopwatches and the spectators, what remains is the pure, unfiltered relationship between the human and the mountain. Whisenant didn't need the world to see him climbing those peaks to know their value.
Right. He was doing it purely for the experience of doing it. But, that intensely solitary pursuit didn't make him a hermit, though. In fact, if you look at the aftermath of his tragic death, the exact opposite is true.
Yeah, completely.
The very community he would escape from is the one currently holding his legacy together.
The tributes pouring in really highlight the paradox of the climber's life. They isolate themselves in these extreme environments, but the bonds they form with the people who understand that specific drive are incredibly deep.
I mean, you are literally trusting these people with your life on the end of a rope.
Exactly.
Bailey Moore, who is described in the sources as his lifelong friend and confidant, shared her family's absolute heartbreak over the loss. But she noted they found comfort in knowing he died doing what he loved in the Sierra Nevada.
And we see that sentiment rippling out across the climbing world. Followers and friends left messages detailing how they spent the entire day crying.
Yeah.
They praised his strength, his grace, and his thoughtfulness. But the phrase that kept appearing in the sources, the one that really anchors his personality, is his relentless optimism.
Relentless optimism. In a sport that requires you to constantly face down the very real possibility of failure, grievous injury, or death, being relentlessly optimistic is practically a superpower.
It really is.
He clearly brought an infectious energy to everyone he shared a rope with. And that actually brings us to a tribute that, frankly, broke my brain a little bit.
Oh, I know what one you're talking about.
It came from Noah Fox, who climbed El Capitan with Wisnet back in May.
Yeah, Fox shared some beautiful memories of their time together, saying he would cherish them for the rest of his life. But he also dropped a statistic in his tribute regarding another speed accomplishment they achieved together on El Capitan.
Okay, wait. Let's unpack that stat from the source because it threw me for a total loop when I read it. The source explicitly says that Fox revealed they completed 2 ground-to-summit ascents in a combined time of 14 minutes and 38 seconds.
Yeah.
Let me just repeat that for you listening. 2 ground-to-summit ascents of a massive mountain face in just over 14 minutes. That defies the laws of physics and human endurance as we know them. I mean, climbing 3,000 feet once in 3 hours is superhuman. Doing 2 ascents in under 15 minutes would mean they are moving vertically at over 400 feet per minute. You can barely ride a standard elevator that fast. How's that possible?
You're entirely right to flag the physics there. Ascending 3,000 vertical feet of granite in 7 minutes is physiologically impossible.
Okay, thank God. I thought I was losing my mind.
No, you're right. In the context of climbing tributes and lore, this is almost certainly a misquoted stat for a specific shorter training pitch that they maybe nicknamed a ground to summit route.
Oh, okay.
Or perhaps an inside joke or legendary exaggeration that just made its way into the memorial. But what's truly fascinating isn't the literal physics of that specific typo, it's the mindset it reveals.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the fact that they are tracking their movements down to the exact second, 14 minutes and 38 seconds, shows that the community operates in a framework where time optimization is the ultimate language of mastery.
Oh, I see.
They are constantly looking for ways to strip away every single inefficiency in their gear, their movement, and their route finding. They are taking rock climbing, which is traditionally a slow, methodical, days-long puzzle, and attempting to engineer it into a track and field sprint event.
It really shows how they live on the absolute bleeding edge of the possible. They are constantly trying to fracture reality to see how much faster they can go.
Exactly.
But there is a very real, very human cost to living on that edge, and the climbing community knows that better than anyone. Going back to Bailey Moore, her response to Noah Fox's tribute was incredibly poignant.
It was. She told Fox that, based on what she had seen, Whisenant had cherished those moments on the wall with him just as much. But then she urged Fox to take care of himself and to continue pursuing his passion in Jake's honor.
Continue pursuing your passion. What does that say about how grief is processed in this highly specialized, high-risk world? Because for most people, if someone we loved died doing a dangerous activity, our immediate instinct would be to tell everyone else we love to stop doing it.
Oh, absolutely. But in mountain culture, risk is an accepted currency. They understand that the mountains give life its sharpest meaning, even as they hold the power to take it away.
Wow.
Moore's response is a profound testament to that ethos. To tell Fox to stop climbing out of fear would be a betrayal of exactly what Wisnet lived for. In this community, you don't honor the fallen by walking away from the mountain.
You keep going.
Yeah, you honor them by continuing to tie in, by continuing to climb, and by carrying their joy and their relentless optimism up the rock with you.
You honor them by continuing to search for that flow state. And I think that brings us to the core of what we can all take away from Jake Wisnant's incredible, albeit far too short, life. You know, you don't have to be a record-setting rock climber scaling granite walls to apply his ethos to your own world.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
We can all look at our own lives and strive for that balance. We can seek out our own versions of a flow state in our professional or public lives. Those moments where we are highly focused, executing at our absolute highest level, entirely dialed into our goals. But, crucially, we must also remember to actively carve out time for the equivalent of the High Sierra.
We need that raw, unrecorded solitude and exploration, doing something difficult just for ourselves, where the only reward is the quiet confidence we build internally.
Exactly. No audience, no stopwatches, no social media posts, just the simple experience of being.
It is the delicate balance between the roar of achievement and the silence of fulfillment. Wisnet managed to master both.
You really did.
And it leaves me with this final thought for you to mull over today as you go about your routine. Think about that frantic, meticulously choreographed sprint up El Capitan, and then think about him sleeping alone under the stars and the dirt of the King's Kern Divide.
Yeah.
As extreme athletes continue to push human physical capabilities to the absolute limit, shaving seconds and minutes off records on ancient geological formations through technology and neuroscience, at what point do we hit the absolute physiological ceiling of human speed?
That's a great question.
Right. And when that final physical limit is reached, when not a single microsecond can possibly be shaved off the clock, will the only frontier left for these athletes be that pure, unrecorded solitude that Jake Whisenant loves so much?
Because when you literally cannot go any faster, the only place left to explore is deeper.
When you can't go faster, you go deeper. Thank you for joining us for today's deep dive into the extraordinary life of Jake Wisnet. We hope you carry a bit of his relentless optimism into whatever challenges you are facing today. Until next
Okay, one question for you. What do you think makes climbers like Jake Whisenant willing to risk their lives pursuing extraordinary records on some of the world's most dangerous and challenging mountains? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.